Welcome to the Long Thread podcast about spinning, stitching, and weaving by hand. The podcast is presented by Long Thread Media, publishers of Spin-Off, Handwoven, Piecework, and Little Looms magazines. Find us online at longthreadmedia.com. Trinway Silks is where weavers, spinners, knitters, and stitchers find the silk they love. Select from the largest variety of silk spinning fibers, silk yarn, and silk threads and ribbons at trinwaysilks.com. You'll discover a rainbow of colors thoughtfully hand-dyed in Colorado. Love natural? Trinway's array of wild silks provide choices beyond white. If you love silk, you'll love Trinway Silks, where superior quality and customer service are guaranteed.
Hi, I'm Gabi Van Tassel from Bluebonnet Crafters, and I'm the inventor of turtle pin looms. Pin looms are small handheld looms that quickly weave self-contained fabric pieces like squares, hexagons, and more. Weave with almost any yarn you have on hand, then combine the fabric pieces into projects of any size. These looms make wonderful companions for any fiber lover, at home or on the go. I'd love for you to visit us at turtleloom.com to explore the full loom catalog, patterns, and more. Hope to see you there.
I'm your host, Long Thread Media co-founder Ann Marrow. Diana Wiley is the founder and executive director of Handspun Hope, which offers yarn, craft supplies, and finished goods. The organization focuses on improving the lives of women in Rwanda and partners in other areas of Africa. Diana, thanks so much for being here.
Yes, thank you for having me.
So I thought that I knew what Handspun Hope was, which was a yarn company that made handspun yarn, but I recently was in one of your booths and I discovered that there's so much more going on at Handspun Hope than I thought. Can you tell me a little bit about the company and your project?
Sure. So we are actually a nonprofit organization. We're registered a nonprofit organization in the United States. We're a registered NGO in Rwanda. So our whole organization really exists to support our organization in Rwanda. So in Rwanda, we have over 200 employees there, and it's focused on employing and changing the lives of at-risk women. And when I say at-risk women, these are women that are maybe living with HIV, have lived with extreme poverty, have really had all kinds of trauma in their lives, whether that's from genocide or other conflict, if it's extreme hunger, domestic abuse. And so that's who we are there to support. And so our program is not, we are members of the Fair Trade Federation. We're not only members of the Fair Trade Federation, but we don't just sell things. They have a job of making yarn and making needle-felted items, but it's really about giving them holistic care. So it's not just the employment. We do pay them above fair wage standards in Rwanda. So Rwanda labor law kind of sets the guidelines of what people make according to their education and background and experience. And so we pay well above what the Rwanda labor law says. But it's not just providing employment, but we provide wraparound holistic care. So we pay family health care for themselves and for their children. We have 2 psychologists on staff that are there on the campus. We have a social worker, we have a full-time nurse, a part-time doctor, and this past year we opened up a daycare center on our campus.
Great.
So now the women that have young children have a place where their young children can be cared for. So we provide in that school right now, it's an early education center. Right now we have 58 children there, but it's designed to hold up to 100 children. And we have college-educated teachers that are working there. And so the children are learning not only Kinyarwanda, which is their native language, but they're learning French and English. And then they also get a high-protein meal every day. They get an egg, porridge, and a banana every day. So they're getting that high protein so that will make the learning a little bit easier for them. So we're really trying to focus. So it's really from infancy till kindergarten, and then they would go into primary school. So it's really setting them for advanced learning well beyond after they leave our center. So that's just another benefit to the women.
So how did you decide to do this in Rwanda?
We are a faith-based organization, and I had started a long-term project with at a hospital in Mozambique through a former church of mine. And I had been doing, I don't have a healthcare background, but I was doing support. It was a hospital that served a community of over 500,000 people. And they had 3 doctors and they were rewashing disposable gloves. And this was during the AIDS crisis. So, did that from like 2000 until really 2007. But in 2005, I had someone that joined me in Mozambique, and I really had been feeling a call. I mean, that's what happened. I felt a call from God, and it was just constant about Rwanda. At that time in 2005, it had been just after the 10-year anniversary of the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. And you were hearing a lot about the work that was being done in Rwanda, but I couldn't really find a place to enter into Rwanda. I didn't think I could just show up and start working. And so I started seeking out avenues of, coming alongside someone else to work there. And what I found out was that someone I had worked with in my professional career had left his position. I was working for Pitney Bowes at the time, and he had been the vice president of Pitney Bowes Finance. So he was my, like 4 management levels up above from where I was. And but I found out he had taken a position with World Relief as the country director in Rwanda. And so he and his wife invited me to go to Rwanda in June of 2007. It's like 19 years ago this month, about now, and invited me to go and see what World Relief was doing all over the country, knowing that we were looking for something for our own organization that had started. So I went there in June of 2007 and a couple of weeks on the ground with World Relief. And I don't know if you know about World Relief, but they're also a Christian organization that is empowering the local church to take care of their own. And so saw what World Relief was doing, and it was obvious that our work needed to be with women. Saw so many, women who didn't have any type of support. There had been, in 94, there had been during the genocide, one of the acts of war was really to have these rape campaigns to rape women and infect them with HIV by militia that were known to be HIV positive, so that they would be infected and that the killing could go on long after the genocide was over. And that was really what I saw. I interviewed many, many women. I remember interviewing women who were nursing their young babies, and telling me that they had HIV, and it was just horrific. And so that's really, I guess what really got me there and got me started. And so I came home from that trip 19 years ago and quit my my professional career 2 days later, and here I am, still going at it. So that's the yeah. So in Rwanda, we have our own flock of merino sheep. The women, we have a sheep farm, and the women use the wool from the merino sheep, dye it organically, make handspun yarn, handspun merino wool. We have Angora rabbits that we imported about 10 years ago. So we have German Angora rabbits, and we spin that and dye it organically as well. And then we are working with this group in Madagascar, and they're making wild Borosero silk. So before we started importing the silk into Rwanda, we actually bought silk scarves from a women's cooperative in Madagascar. So online, if you go online to our website, you'll see, the yarn, but you'll see a lot of other products. And so we buy from other organizations across Africa, buy a fair trade, whatever they're asking, and then we resell to help raise money for our own organization. So everything is reinvested in either buying more product or supporting our women. And so this group in Madagascar, who we've been buying silk scarves from maybe 15 years, is who we are actually working with to make the yarn that we're importing for our Borosero wild silk yarn.
And I know that you also, in addition to, I was most familiar initially with the merino, and we had an article in Farm and Fiber Knits about the Borosero silk. But I've been wondering, I know that you have a project in Kenya, and I've been curious about you have some cotton elements as well. How are you bringing all of these things together? Is it all tying back to Rwanda?
It all ties back to Rwanda. Now, it's not Kenya. We do have products from Kenya, but we don't have any fiber sources from Kenya. We have cotton from Ethiopia, and I bet you that's maybe what you're
Oh,
talking about.
that's
So
what I was thinking. Yeah.
okay, so we import. So we work with another women's co-op in Ethiopia who is spinning cotton, and it's all spun on a drop spindle. So the silk and the cotton are all spun on drop spindles. We import those into Rwanda and then dye it organically. And the women working for Handspun Hope, dye it organically, put it into the skeins for sale.
And, so that kind of answers the question, why Rwanda, but why handspun? What made you decide that textiles and craft were the way to go with this project?
When I first went to Rwanda in June of 2007, I was really trying to be open because I knew that the women that we wanted to start supporting, they needed safe accommodations, number one, but you can't just go into a less than developed country and say, oh, I'm going to give you a house. Well, how are they going to take care of that house? How are they going to maintain that house? How are they going to support that house? And have you really helped them if that's all you're doing? So I knew that we had to find a way for them to be able to earn an income. And so while I was on the ground there, that first trip with World Relief, they had taken me to a tiny church up in the northern province where they were doing a livestock sharing project. And so it's basically worked a lot like Heifer International, if you're familiar with them, where you might give a goat or a sheep, and then they give the second offspring or the first offspring, they give those away to another family. And so they were doing something very similar with sheep. But I knew nothing about fiber. I would like to say I know more about fiber now than I did then, but I knew nothing about fiber at the time. But I knew enough to know that they could do something with the wool of the sheep. And when I came home from that first trip, I was actually watching video of that trip with one of our founding board members. And she was like, maybe we should check into that. Maybe they could do something with the wool if you know that that's a resource there, because we really didn't know what we were going to do as far as, providing an income for the ladies. And it went from getting this wool sample in Rwanda. And, I live in Texas. And so Texas A&M has a sheep and goat specialist there, and they have a specialist. And then I had been put in contact with a fiber specialist in New York. And so I was taking these little fiber samples and I was splitting them apart, and I was sending one to the sheep and goat specialist at Texas A&M and one to this fiber specialist in New York. And they were both saying, no, this is all terrible. You just can't do anything with it, because what I know now is that the domestic sheep in Rwanda that are native to Rwanda, that everywhere, they mostly use for meat, but it doesn't have kink in the fiber, and so you can't spin it. And so with that, we went through several times of looking at different samples, sending them to these two, and they were both like, nope. At the fourth time, we found remnants of what was merino sheep. So before 1994, there was a Catholic organization that was spinning wool. We don't know what they were doing. We don't know what they were doing with it. But in 94, everything was destroyed. The craft was destroyed. The company was destroyed. We just couldn't find anything. But we found remnants of a merino sheep. And so on this, I think it was the fourth fiber sample I sent to them, they went, oh, yeah, this has a little bit of kink in it. This is good. You could do something. You at least do rugs with it. It wasn't great. And so we knew that that's the kind of sheep we were looking for. And so we were, looking all over the country trying to find sheep that resembled this sheep and what we know now is merino. And we knew that that was the wool, but we ended up, long story short, is we ended up importing our first flock of merino sheep from Kenya. And maybe that's where you got the Kenya piece too. I'm not sure. But we imported ewes. The first time we imported 20. And then I think the second time we did 80. It was a whole truckload ewes. But the Rwandan government at the same time, this is about 2009, so about a year and a half into this, we imported the merino ewes, but then Rwanda government had imported some merino ram from South Africa. And they were thinking, oh, we'll just let them breed with the domestic sheep and we will have a good fiber source. And it did not work. It did not work.
No.
And people did not understand. And they were much larger than domestic sheep. And, it just didn't work. And so people were like, okay, we're going to eat these sheep. And we're like, no, go and buy all the sheep. So we went and we were able to buy 3 or 4 of these South African rams. So these South African rams and the Kenyan ewes is what started our flock initially. So that's how we started. So it's a lot of it was just a learning experience. I didn't know anything about fiber, nothing. So it was, I've been self-taught.
Well, and so you didn't have a fiber background, but
None.
presumably these women didn't necessarily either, right?
No, they did not. They absolutely did not.
Yeah.
They absolutely did not.
Mm-hmm.
So, I had to learn from people in the US. I would go and take classes and I was like, oh, when I found out that we could, they could spin wool with a drop spindle, I thought, oh, this is so easy. Drop spindles are easy to get to Rwanda. And that's how we started. And, when we first started, I mean, we have we have lots of stages of our wool, but basically it was rope. It was pretty awful, but we were very proud of it because the ladies could finally make something that resembled yarn, but it was still pretty bad. Yeah. So, but then it evolved and, it was 10 years from 2007 to 2017 that all we did was practice making yarn. And in about 2015, we actually got some spinning wheels. We bought a couple of spinning wheels and took them over. And that's when our yarn really started to improve. Is when they were able to spin, and when we had another fiber specialist that came with us, and we were shearing the sheep too short, and so that was making shortcuts, and it was making it pokey and sticky. But now, we don't shear our sheep until the fibers are 3.5 inches long, so it gives us a softer, loftier wool. And so, it was all a learning process for me. But no, I did not know anything. I relied on a lot of experts to tell me and to teach me.
Because there's the whole process of learning how to process the wool and make the yarn. But then there's also the part of like understanding the market for who's going to purchase this. And so I'm curious about making that connection between the people who are producing it and the purchasers.
Yes. So what we had been, we had a few customers at that time in 2017 when we really started wholesaling the yarn. A few small local yarn stores. But in 2017, I was like, the ladies should knit sweaters. And we have a group of women who are very good knitters. They don't knit from patterns. They knit from templates. So I would sketch out a template on graph paper and they would knit to the template. And so we felt like they were good enough to sell those products at market. And so we started showing in New York. We showed at New York Now and also Atlanta. And that was actually going really well. But the knitting took so much oversight on our part that we kind of went back to just the yarn. It's like, let's just do the basics. And then they do knit some things that we sell there in Rwanda. And we do still sell some things, custom pieces online.
There's kind of the story aspect to it as well as the product aspect. And how much do you find is people are really wanting to buy into this story, and how much of it is I have to have that thing? Or is it kind of a combination of both?
I think it's a combination of both. I mean, I think you can have a great story, but if you don't have a great product, it's not going to last. And so, we've always tried to make a really high quality product. And, if you think about it, I mean, I don't know, I know there are people that do, hand spun organic wool, naturally dyed wool. That's fairly common, but, to have an organic hand spun cotton, especially, spun on a drop spindle or the silk spun on a drop spindle and organically dyed, buying that in skeins, it's really non-existent.
It's true. And I find it so interesting that there's this kind of whole, there's those yarn elements, but then there's wonderful buttons and there's wonderful needle felted items.
Sure.
And so kind of rounding out. And then sometimes when I go into your booth, there are also ready to wear garments that are made from, African prints. So you're
Yes.
kind of building this whole handmade collection.
Yes. And so we have our online store is called Hope Artisan Collective. And so, as I said, we work with different artisans in Rwanda who we've had long-term relationships with that make our Mupenzi skirts and our Mupenzi wrap pants. And they're all out of the beautiful Kitenge fabrics. And so we do support other artisans. We have someone in Ethiopia that we buy leather from, leather purses, and we have ostrich eggshell jewelry from Namibia, West Africa. So we have a lot of variety in that besides the fiber, but and that's all to support those organizations and also so into what we're doing in Rwanda as well.
So speaking of long term, how long do the women who work with Handspun Hope in Rwanda typically have a relationship with you? Is it something where they come and they're part of your community for life? Or is it something where they meet a need and then move on to something else?
We have both. We have some women. We have one woman that's in her 90s,
Wow.
and she just loves coming to work, and mm-hmm. she, just this last year, for an example, her name is Rosa. And, one of her dreams was to own a pig. That was one of her dreams. And so okay. she didn't have a place to put the pig, but her granddaughter, who actually also works for us, had a place. So Rosa bought a pig, and every morning she gets up an extra hour early just so she can walk and go see the pig and then come to work, because she's very proud of having, being able to own a pig, which sounds really small to us, but it's a huge thing for her. But we have women that started with us in 2007 who are still employed. And then we have women, most women will stay with us, but sometimes some of the younger women may have another opportunity, like they may get married or they may have family land in another part of Rwanda and they feel like their opportunities are greater to go there. Sometimes we have women that leave and then they come back. So, we really try to remain, with an open door, but definitely we want to encourage them if there is a greater opportunity for them. We don't ever want anyone to feel held captive by the organization.
So you mentioned that, this is a faith-based organization, and certainly mm-hmm. you felt that calling. How does that play out in sort of the daily aspects of the project? Are you choosing partners based on that, or is it just sort of the motivation that guides you?
No, I would say it's the motivation behind who we are, but that at the core, that is who we are.
So how do you identify your colleagues, your workers? How do they come to you?
Okay, that's a great question. And if we could hire women every single day, we would have an opportunity to hire women every single day. We have women at our gates wanting jobs all the time. And when they see me, more show up, but I really don't do any of the hiring. I leave that. We have a great staff. As I mentioned, we have 2 psychologists and a social worker. And number one, they have to be able to work. And so our psychologists will interview them and kind of assess where they are, what their needs are. But our mission is really to try to those that wouldn't otherwise be able to get a job. A lot of the work that they would qualify for is construction. And when I say construction, it's hauling buckets of mud on your head or hand chiseling away a volcanic rock to make it a brick. It's really difficult work. And so, so that's really our target, are the women that really need the opportunity. I don't make that decision. Our psychologists do. So also Rwanda is, the genocide, yes, was 30 some odd years ago, but there are really 3 different ethnic backgrounds there. And so we also have to be very careful that we are, that our hiring is equitable among those 3 ethnic backgrounds. And we are. So we have all 3 people groups. A lot of people are familiar with, and now they're all considered Rwandan citizens. So let me say that clearly. But, there's Tutsi, there's Hutu, and there is Bantu, which was a pygmy group that nobody really cared about in 1994, and they really don't care about them. They're among the most discriminated against in Rwanda. It's a a pygmy group. And, Rosa that I told you, that's 92. That's her ethnicity. And so for her to be 92 and still have a job, I mean, that's a great thing. It's really great for her. So yeah, but they're assessed. Yeah.
One of the things that's, I think, really a challenge for organizations that have helping as their mission is to discern the difference between helping somebody have a long-term sustainable path forward versus just giving something. And
absolutely,
the way that just giving something can be kind of it can destroy a local industry, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be very damaging. Absolutely.
With the best of intentions, but yeah.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. It's heard story after story, like, oh, I bought so-and-so a car, but then, when he needed tires, what did he do? He couldn't use the car anymore. I mean, it's just kind of what happens. And, we have groups that will, sometimes if people want, sometimes we take groups to go, but, really when we take groups, it's really not about going and doing the work. It's really about being there and being a voice for the organization, observing what's happening on the ground versus getting in there and working. Yeah, it can be very damaging. I'm not going to bring a team to come build a fence or build a building when Rwandans are very capable of doing those things,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So how do you have what's the organization like between the US and Rwanda? How do you kind of work together with running the group?
Okay. Well, we have, as I mentioned, we have a whole management staff in Rwanda. We have a country director who oversees our Rwanda operations and is very capable. In fact, he's about to graduate in August with his MBA from Baylor online, which is amazing. Oh. Mm-hmm. But I mean, he's wonderful, and our staff is very capable of running the whole thing. And so we communicate via WhatsApp every day. Sometimes we have calls every day, but we have a standing call. And so, really, we have also in Rwanda, we have our showroom on our campus because tourism is very big in Rwanda because that's where people go and see the silverback gorillas. And so where we're located is about 40 minutes from base camp where people go to visit the gorillas. And so we often have a lot of tourists coming through. And so we'll have tourists coming through. They'll buy things from our showroom there locally. And of course, we work with a lot of hotels. I think you've seen some of our felted sculptures. And so
yes,
we use every piece of our wool. And so, the first quality wool goes into the yarn, but the second and thirds go into our felted sculptures. And so the ladies make a felted gorilla. Actually, I think 3 or 4 different styles of felted gorillas, but we have a lot of the high-end resorts buy those gorillas from us. And so every single month. And so that's what helps sustain the organization. So that revenue never leaves Rwanda. It's reinvested in Rwanda. And so my job is to do fundraising here. And so my fundraising and our sales in the US supplement whatever they are bringing in Rwanda. So, currently, if we look at our revenue streams, we're about 50% sales and about 50% donations.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So how do you connect with, I mean, I guess I mostly think of an American craft audience, and there are craft audiences all over the world, but like the local yarn stores here, for example, and knitters here, how do you figure out what they want and bring it back? Yeah.
Sure. A great question. We go to a lot of the fiber shows across the nation, and, we really just see what the demand is. But, we've made felted sculptures for quite some time, and it used to be kind of funny because we thought, the felted, and our felted sculptures, like our original sheep, look more like dinosaur dogs. It's all kind of developed over time, but they're quite good. Their sculptures are really, really good, and so we sell the full size sculptures, but we very quickly started doing ornaments, and we sell so many ornaments during the holidays. Felted sheep and buffalo and longhorn and giraffes and everything. So those are probably among the most popular, sometimes even more popular than the yarn. So it just depends on the customer, but I mean, who doesn't love sweet felted ornament. We sell a lot of those.
Do you have a favorite item when you're putting a booth out, for example? And is there something that you look at and you're like, oh, this is my favorite. I love this one.
I love the felted sculptures because I think you can really see the women's creativeness in that. Because when we come up with a new animal, we will say, okay, we'll show. And keep in mind, these women have never seen a gorilla up close. They've never seen a lion up close. They do a chicken really, really well because they've seen a chicken, but most animals they haven't seen. And so, we'll show them a photograph of this live animal, a few photographs, and then 2 or 3 of them will do their best at making that animal. And then we take the best qualities of all 3 or 4 and make our first sample. And that's how we come up with it. So it's really, they're really created from the women's artistic ability. Whereas, the yarn, they know how to make it, but the felted sculptures really take on their take and their artisan touch.
I guess part of what I'm getting at is that when you see one of these items, there's a kind of a cohesiveness to the collection, whether it's the yarn that you're spinning from the merino sheep in Rwanda, or the cotton from Ethiopia. There are things that you think, okay, these all go together. The horn buttons, for example, and so they're coming from all different countries, and they're coming from people who don't necessarily have a unified tradition of making these things, and yet you're sort of assembling them into the Handspun Hope kind of collection.
Yes, that is true. We have a artisan in Rwanda that makes our horn buttons, for example, and those are just horn is, they sometimes they make jewelry from horn or like horn beads or things like that. And I was like, could you make buttons? And the buttons have been a huge hit because they look great with, if somebody's going to knit something out of our yarn, those buttons look amazing with the cotton or the wool or the Angora, any of them, or the silk. It's just that natural organic look. So
how do you find the partners that you're working with in Ethiopia and, Madagascar, for example? Because I'm sure that there must be collectives of women's crafts all around. And so how do you reach out and figure out these are folks who are going to be a good part of our project?
Sure. Well, the group that we're buying, as I mentioned, the group that we're buying the silk from in Madagascar, we were buying these beautiful hand-woven scarves from them years before we were buying just the yarn. And there are such talented artisans in Madagascar. In this same group they can do that, but they're making raffia. They're making raffia bags for us as well. Oh. And we have some of those online where we have a tea-stained raffia bag, and they did this year. In fact, we've just put it up online, a very brightly covered, it's not natural dyes, but very brightly covered crochet squares raffia bag that's adorable. So they can do anything. And so sometimes I'll come up with an idea and I'll say, oh, what about this? Could you do this? And send them the measurements, and they're like, oh yes, let us make you a sample. And so, yeah, they do great. And so we kind of expand upon maybe what they're already doing. So that's, in Madagascar. And then in Ethiopia, we were already working with, as I mentioned, a couple of organizations that did leather. And then we knew that they were hand spinning cotton in Ethiopia. And so one of these organizations has a group of women that hand spin cotton for them. And so I was like, oh, would you, could we buy hand spun cotton from your group? And he's like, of course. And so that's kind of how we started. But they're relationships that we've had for years. 12, 15 years.
And I see your work at Rhinebeck, and it's very interesting because so many of those elements of the New York Sheep and Wool Festival, they emphasize this is hyper local by the type of product and by the workmanship, et cetera. It's very closely linked to the other booths there, but it's from half a world away, quite literally.
Yes, definitely. And I think, maybe it's because, I don't know, we applied for that show. I felt like we applied for 6 years before we got in. And I'm sure it's, we are a U.S.-based nonprofit, so maybe that's what helped get us in. But you're right, and everything is there. But what's interesting about that show, more so than the other shows, is that most of the product that we have in Rhinebeck I would say, 85% of it are the products that we make in Rwanda. We also take, we have handbags from Kenya. They're very popular tote bags there. And we have the skirts and the wrap pants that are also very popular there. But, it's mostly yarn and it's mostly felted sculptures. We also make a nativity set that's felted that's wildly popular as well. But I love that most of the products at that show are, Handspun Hope products rather than the Hope Artisan Collective.
I wonder how many of the folks who come through the booth and fall in love with the projects there are really aware of the story behind it and how much of it is, I really want a cute pink cow.
Sure. I think both. I think the products, like as I mentioned at the beginning of this interview, you can't just have a great story. The great story helps, but you have to have a great product. You have to have a cute product. You have to have something that people want. But now we have people that come in and they'll buy, a couple of ornaments. The next year they come back and they buy 2 other ornaments, that they really love it. People love the story behind it, or they just love the product. I mean, they may not care. They may not care about the story, but they care about the product. So we do several large fiber shows, but most of those are in the fall. And actually, we're starting in July, if you want to call that fall. But we'll do the Flock Fiber Fest in Seattle. Mm-hmm. We do that when we were one of the original vendors when they started a few years ago. And so it's turned out to be a great show for us. So we'll be doing that one at the end of July. And then we do the DFW Fiber Fest, which I believe is in August. And then we will be at Rhinebeck in October. And then we do the Houston International Quilt Festival I believe that's in November. So those are our big shows. And so it's almost monthly once we hit July.
So for folks who might be interested in supporting the work that you're doing, how can we be part of it as crafters? As
crafters, you can definitely purchase from us, or you can give charitable donations. It takes, as I mentioned earlier, we're about 50% sales and 50% donations, and it really takes both of those to make everything work together. And it's worked so far. We are 19 years old, or 19 years, starting our 20th year. And it really takes both of those coming together. But know that any purchase or any donation, any contribution, it all goes to support our work.
That's true, because if there weren't a market for the products, that's partly what keeps the project going along.
Sure. And that really, the products is really what gives the women work. And that's the important thing, because there's also healing in working with your hands. And I know that a lot of people will relate to this. If you're spinning or if you're knitting, it's very therapeutic. And so it's worked out to be a great thing for us, because there's also healing in the process as well, and the crafting process. So,
it's interesting as we're speaking, I'm thinking back on, we interviewed Marianne Wise of Multicolores, which is based in Guatemala, mm-hmm. and they developed sort of a curriculum that involved rug hooking, and that there is a Guatemalan tradition of fiber work. Rug hooking was not the medium that they used, but mm-hmm. And then I also interviewed Rangina Hamidi, who created Kandahar Treasures, and she felt sort of called in 2001 and 2002 that there were so many people who were talking about wanting to help the women of Afghanistan, but there weren't people who were really doing very much to help the women mm-hmm. of Afghanistan. And mm-hmm. so she went and did something that's kind of akin. There was a local tradition of embroidery, but she looked around and said, how can I help women make a living and be respected and have their work be valued in their community, and it could be by their handwork and by finding a market that would support that work. So I think it's really exciting that from all these different backgrounds, there's good being done in the world through handcraft and through people appreciating handcraft.
Yes, I agree. One of the things I wanted to mention too is that, we have I mentioned that there's the guerrillas that are up north in the northern province close to where we are. And Kigali is the capital city in Rwanda. And so we are 2 hours north of that spot. And so last year, just about a year ago, there was a new, like a coffee shop stop for people that were going to see the gorillas. That's kind of the halfway mark. And they had a boutique, and we kind of decided to take a risk and rent the boutique that's part of this coffee shop, which is a major stopping point. And it has been a wonderful thing for us as far as trying to generate revenue in sales there in Rwanda that doesn't ever leave Rwanda. And again, that's really what we'd like to try to build so that it could become more sustainable in Rwanda without, the donations. But I still think we're a bit far from that. But, it's very different. Our products look very different from the normal Rwandan crafts that you would normally see. And I don't call our items curios. I just don't, because that's not what they are. But it's not the traditional baskets and fabrics. It's very neutral. It's a very high-end shop, and people just love it. And I get people emailing me every week from stopping in that shop, not even going to our campus, but just on the aesthetic of the shop as well. So we're trying to be different. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you about the campus. What does that mean?
So the campus, everybody always wants to know if people live on the campus, and they don't live on the campus. But we really do have we have several buildings on our campus. So we have, a medical building. It's our medical building, but that's where the nurse and the psychologists are housed. Their offices are, and where the women go get counseling and treatment. We have a dye house where all the fiber is dyed naturally. We have a production building where we have a room for spinning. We have a room for carding in preparation for spinning. We have a place where they're making felted animals, and it's a 2-story building. I wish you could see it. I'll be happy to send you a photo. But
please do.
We have a production building, and then we have the childcare building, and then we have our administrative building. So it is a campus. It has all those buildings in it, and it's just our hope is to make it a beautiful place for the women to come and work. So lots of gardens. There are bird of paradise and agapantha all throughout. I mean, it's really a quite beautiful place, but it's just a place for them to work. They do not live there.
Well, Diana, thank you so much for your time.
Sure, of course.
I look forward to seeing you at one of your stops in the fall.
Yes, I look forward to seeing you too, Anne. Thank you for the time.
Thanks to our sponsors for supporting the podcast. Thank you for listening to the Long Thread Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please rate the show and leave us a comment on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. Thanks again.